kick it off. Okay. So just bear with me if we are doing a couple of, we're a little out of order, but I think we'll be good. So hello, everyone. I want to thank you so much for being here today. We have an incredible group, and I'm really excited for this work that's ahead, and specifically for this group of partners to come together and bring all of the experience that you have, the knowledge, your various resources that you can bring to this work in order to help us develop the state's agenda to move forward with this important issue of student basic needs. So just a little bit of housekeeping. I know everybody has already begun adding your name and organization to the chat. Please continue to do that if you have not done it yet. We will have more time to connect later, but just excited to kind of see the great partners that are in this space with us. Also, I'm gonna add to the chat. Let's see, make sure this goes to everyone. I've just shared the agenda again, or at least it's in the process of sharing. So please take a look at that and review those guiding principles and commitments that we wanted to share. And if you do have any questions throughout this meeting, feel free to throw them into the chat, and then we'll make sure that we address them before we head to break. So today's goal is to really set the stage and build energy for our work this spring. Uh-oh, it said my agenda failed to be sent. Well, if it doesn't work, if you don't mind.
Loaded. It just loaded, Lois.
Okay,
yep,
fantastic.
It's in the chat.
Thank you, Carrie. You can, I was going to say, reference the email that I may have sent last week. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and, am I sharing? It's sharing, right?
Okay. Yep, we can see your screen.
Thank you. Well, our Lieutenant Governor will be joining us in a moment, so I will just continue to move forward really quickly, and we will pause everything as soon as she jumps on. But today we're going to do a quick overview of our work, the objectives of this action network. We will have some great time to get to know one another in some breakout rooms. And I truly believe that whenever you are embarking upon a collaborative effort, that really your progress moves at the speed of trust. And so having time and spending time together, getting to know one another and our own passions and where those align is really always time well spent. We will then have an exhilarating data presentation from Dr. Matt Berry with KY Stats. Super excited to always dig into the data. And really just with like that ear of what else do we need to know? What other questions do we want to ask our amazing longitudinal data system that has so many answers at our fingertips? Okay, and then we'll just kind of wrap up. So as we get started, I wanted to set a little bit of context about the work of this basic needs journey that we've been on, at least from the collaborative's perspective, for about the last year. So the Kentucky Student Success Collaborative is an initiative of the Council on Post-Secondary Education. We launched in October of 2021, really with the purpose of helping bring together our colleges and universities, our community agency, community organizations, state government agency partners to solve and to address together some of those most complex challenges. As we started meeting with campus partners, basic needs arose to the top as one of the most pressing issues that students and institutions were dealing with. And so in the spring of 22, we submitted a proposal to the Lumina Foundation to really do an equity audit deep dive into the student basic needs issue. And that project was accepted, and we are incredibly thankful for the support of Lumina Foundation to really kick off our basic needs work that we will be able to continue beyond this spring and the recommendations that this action network develops. So just to give you a little sense of the four components of our work. First, we really started with a data question and really looking into our longitudinal data system. What do we know about our current students in Kentucky and their access to some of the state benefits that are available? And how do those benefits either impact or support their retention and completion of their programs? We also looked at economic mobility as a factor of individuals that start off receiving kind of basic needs supports, and then ultimately their economic mobility upon completion. And that's what we're going to hear more about later today. Another really amazing component of this project is a research project that is being led by 3 of our faculty partners across the state. We have Jake Gross from the University of Louisville, Zitzi Miraku from the University of Kentucky, and Stephanie Saulnier from Eastern Kentucky University. And all 3 of these faculty are a part of our Action Network, so they will be able to share more about their research as it advances. They started off with an asset map of all basic needs, services, and resources available on our campuses across every single institution, public, private, 2-year, 4-year in Kentucky. That database is going to be a great resource and an asset to our campus partners who might be interested in learning about what is X university doing about housing security issues. And then to be able to kind of come together in a peer network or a peer learning community to share a little bit more about how those things worked out. I'm so excited that Lieutenant Governor has just joined us. So I am going to hit the pause button on this presentation, and then I'll pick it up as soon as we have had a chance to open the meeting with her. Lieutenant Governor, are you ready? I'm sure you stay ready. I just want to.
I am ready. I apologize. I'm on the road today. So thank you guys for your patience.
Well, I can't thank you enough for making this a priority to be present with us. I think that speaks volumes to the importance of this work, to the governor's office, and I know to you personally. So thank you so much for being here. Everyone, our Lieutenant Governor, Jacqueline Coleman, is an educator, basketball coach, writer, founder of a nonprofit, and the 58th Lieutenant Governor of Kentucky. She is wife to Chris, mom to Evelyn, adopted mom to Emma, and bonus mom to Will and Nate. During her first term as Lieutenant Governor, Jacqueline has focused on rural economic development and creating a comprehensive cradle-to-career public education and job training system in Kentucky that will produce the future leaders of our Commonwealth. As the highest elected educator in Kentucky, Lieutenant Governor Coleman knows that the future of Kentucky's economy is in our classrooms today. As the Commonwealth's highest elected mom, she's determined to build a better Kentucky for every child, no matter their zip code. I'm very honored to be able to turn over the opening up of our Action Network to you, Lieutenant Governor.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who is here with us this morning. As I reviewed the participant list, if I was in a foxhole, I'd want this group with me. That's all I have to say about it, because you guys are the movers and shakers. You are invested in this work personally, professionally, and you are the village that helps our kids who are at a disadvantage and who have barriers that don't have to be what keeps them from attaining higher education in their way. And so as we work together to ensure that every kid, regardless of their zip code, their parents' income, their skin color, their last name, whatever it is, we want to make sure that every kid has the opportunity that education can provide. And I think all of you know by now that this administration, when we say that we're education first, we've been education first since the very beginning. And I have to credit Governor Beshear for his support of education. And there is no better way to show that than by choosing a teacher to run with him for Lieutenant Governor the first time, and then again the second time. And so that puts our priorities out front, and it gives the education community a voice and a seat at the table, which is something that we've missed out on for so long, which only hurts our students. And so when we talk about education, what I love about working with CPE is, while they are very squarely in the business of higher education and supporting those students, they also recognize the importance of the continuum. And that's why we obviously started the Commonwealth Education Continuum. And there are some days where I think our best advocate for early childhood education is the head of higher education in Dr. Aaron Thompson, which I think says a lot about what he knows about the keys to success for the students that will eventually be on our college campuses, in our apprenticeship programs, in our job training programs, and higher education across the state. And so, you know, we're looking at all of the barriers that you know, may impede the progress of students who deserve the same opportunity as everyone else. And as many of you know, I am from one of the smallest towns in Kentucky, the sprawling metropolis of Bergen, which is, you know, has 1,000 people in a 4-way stop. And so creating access to students in rural parts of the state is definitely a priority, because again, your zip code shouldn't determine your educational outcomes or the opportunities that you have. When we look at first generation college students and the support that they need, that they're probably not going to get at home because they're the first person in their family to experience this opportunity, making sure they don't fall through the cracks or fall by the wayside and slip out of the opportunity that higher education can provide them. Low income students, students of color, all of those are really special population groups that we have an untapped potential in. And that is exactly what this group is here to do, is to tap into that potential and to make sure that the very basic needs of our students are met, so that, as we all know, those have to be met first before they can be active participants in their education to create a better life for themselves and their family. And my favorite thing about this group is that it is an action network. And that's what I love about Dr. Thompson's direction with anything he does. He wants to make sure we are producing results and we're going to get something out of this work. It's not just meeting to meet. And so, again, looking at the folks on this call, you guys don't have time for that either. And so to put the weight of the governor's office behind this initiative is critically important to us. We have been proponents of higher education, and I think probably the first administration to openly say we need more of everything in higher education, whether it's a 4-year degree, a 2-year degree, a job training program, all of those things. We have gaps that we need to fill. And so our job is not to tell students what is best for them. Our job is to open every door and let them choose which one they want to walk through to build the life that they want. And in doing so, we're not just changing their life, we're changing their future family life and the trajectory of every family that comes after that. And so I'm so excited about this work. I know we all are committed to this. I know that we all feel this in not just in our minds and know it's the right thing, but we feel it in our hearts, and we know that it's the right thing to do for the right reasons. And so I'm so excited to embark on this journey with you guys to create the kind of commonwealth that we all want for our kids and grandkids. And so as always, in anything that involves education, from our littlest learners through higher education and job training, Governor Beshear and I are shoulder to shoulder with you the whole way. And so with that, I will turn it back over and say thank you so much for allowing us to be a part of this important work.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor Coleman. I appreciate it. And you're welcome to stay with us as long as you like, or I know you have a very busy day, so appreciate you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, friends. Well, that was amazing at helping both set the stage and hopefully build energy. I know it certainly has built my energy to know that we have such strong supporters and advocates in this work. So thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and share screen again and kind of dive back in to the overview of our work. So I was mentioning the Campus Voice Research Project. And basically that our faculty researchers have already begun the asset mapping of the different programs and services available on all of our campuses across Kentucky. They will also be doing a deep dive with 9 institutions in Kentucky to really better understand what those resources look like and what is the process that students experience to access them. And those 9 institutions are all represented on this action network as well. So thank you for being a deep partner in this work. And then they are also, I think, potentially the most compelling and important part of their research is going to be conducting 18 focus groups with students to learn about their awareness of these resources as well as their experience accessing them. So we are going to have a lot to learn from the student voice that is going to inform the work in the direction of this action network. We are also incredibly fortunate to be able to work with kind of state and national expert Carrie Welton, who works with the Institute for College Access and Success. She has advised and assisted several other states in maximizing public benefits for student success. And she's also on our team conducted a policy scan of all of the public benefit policies in Kentucky and conducted over a dozen stakeholder interviews with some incredible findings that I think are going to identify some, hopefully, not too high up in the tree fruit, and also some opportunities for more systemic change. So Carrie, thank you so much for being on our team here. And then finally, and last but not least, we have convened this action network. And an action network is a little different than a committee, you know, like the Lieutenant Governor shared. It's about action. It's about kind of wrapping our arms around a common challenge and working together to figure out what can we do together that none of us can accomplish on our own. And that is what we hope that our recommendations and our proposal moves forward, which will actually be identifying the next steps for this work at the state level, but also on the ground, where each of your organizations and institutions are working directly with students and individuals. So one important element of this work is that it is equity centered. And what that means to us at the collaborative is that we've really identified and put the guiding principles of equity into the forefront of how we've designed this project and the questions that we're asking of our student basic needs services. So those 4 principles are centering student voice, which we're doing through our focus groups, as well as invitations for students to participate in this action network. Building and engaging diverse project teams, which is through representation of regional diversity, racial diversity, and expertise serving Kentuckians here, a part of this action network, as well as our campuses, representing diverse campuses across Kentucky. Disaggregating the data, which we've done pretty extensively through our KY Stats data project. And then also ensuring culturally competent responsiveness to like what are our recommendations and how do they take into account and ensure that we are being culturally competent in the response that we are suggesting that we move forward with. So that will be one of the charges of this action network. So we're very excited for this project. I am going to definitely take a second and introduce, the core team, which are folks that have been meeting since June, bi-weekly, I'm pretty sure, to really move all of this work forward. And I'm just so thankful to this group of folks. So Carrie Welton, as I've introduced before, works with TICAS as the Senior Director of Policy and Advocacy, focused on anti-poverty and basic needs. Shauna King Sims, Executive Director of Transitions and Access in the Workforce and Economic Development area of Kentucky Community and Technical College System. Phyllis Clark, Associate Director with the Collaborative, member of the Council on Post-Secondary Education. Dawn Offit, Executive Director for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion with the Council, and Travis Muncie, Executive Director for Data, Research, and Advanced Analytics with the Council. So thank you to this amazing core team. So just a little bit of context here. All of the work of the collaborative is, really designed to reinforce and help us move forward toward the state's 60 by 30 goal, that 60% of our population will hold a post-secondary credential or degree of value by 2030. the Student Success Collaborative is also pretty firmly established within the success priority, which is where our basic needs is really one of those elements that helps our students not only access education, but then continue on to completion. And equity is a cross-cutting priority of all of the initiatives and work that's going on. So you all have been invited to this conversation because your individual and organizational roles have an opportunity to make a difference in the lives of students. You know, that is our purpose, to make a difference in the lives of students. We have scanned the national literature and Kentucky reports to create an infographic that we hope will really help set the stage for our basic needs work. This is something that we're going to actually have a press release about the Action Network linking to this infographic that is launched later today. And so we will share that back with you, as well as some of the digital assets that hopefully you and your organizations can help promote as well, to really draw attention to the importance of basic needs work, not just as a national issue, but here, especially in Kentucky. Nationally, we know that more than half of college students struggle to have their basic needs met, and that this often puts them in tricky positions where they have to make decisions. Do I feed my family? Do I go to class? And you know, that is not the situation that we want for our students. And so we're trying to figure out what we can do to offer that support. Specifically, more than half of our students are struggling with food insecurity. More than 40% have showed signs of housing insecurity, and more than 10% of our students have experienced homelessness. So these are the folks that are working the hardest to meet their goals and move forward with their financial stability. But these are the barriers that are definitely in their way. Now, we also recognize that basic needs is a really broad issue, and it involves a lot of factors, not just food and housing, but also transportation, childcare, technology, and access to healthcare and mental health support as well. So it is a very broad issue. We also know from our research that students of color are more likely to experience basic needs insecurity, and they are less likely to seek institutional supports compared to their white peers with the same challenges. Basic needs insecurity can lead to extensive mental and emotional harm, and it most definitely impacts a student's academic success and retention. Some consequences of having or experiencing basic needs insecurity: students are more likely to drop a class, more likely to fail a class, and more likely to pause their education for financial reasons. Of those that do pause their education, only 20% of shows in the data come back and complete that degree that they originally started. Now, while basic needs insecurity can certainly be experienced by all students in all income ranges, students who are least likely to have the social capital to get financial support in emergency are those receiving Pell Grants, which is the federal grant program for students with the greatest financial need. In our community college system in Kentucky, that's nearly 60% of all students. We also know the power of and value of education to create a pathway out of poverty. And yet through the pandemic, we've seen continued declining enrollments among individuals with low income. And so, we need to help reverse that trend. And what is the connection between public benefits and student success? I believe about 13% of our KCTCS students receive public benefits. That's either SNAP or KTAP or TANF, out of the 59% that receive Pell. So that's a very big gap. I mean, that's like in national literature, it's known as the SNAP gap, which there was an article that I shared last week that kind of really dove deep into what this is. And so there are many things that institutions can do to increase awareness about benefits eligibility and provide assistance with application for benefits. I'm going to put a quick link to that article about the SNAP gap in the chat here for everybody. So of the SNAP recipients who graduated from a KCTCS program, more than 80% continue their enrollment to gain another credential or degree, or they're working and they're earning more than 200% above the federal poverty line. And we know that those earnings are just going to continue to increase with more experience. So really it is a starting point. Those credentials are a great starting point that lead to more economic stability. We have another opportunity in Kentucky, which is that of our individuals in the Commonwealth who are receiving public benefits, only 8% have a post-secondary degree. So that's 92% of our state's population that is receiving public benefits who could be introduced to and enrolled in a post-secondary program and hopefully on a path toward financial self-sufficiency. So we know the possibilities of economic mobility and financial self-sufficiency are clear with post-secondary credentials and degrees, but the mountain is steep and there are many more barriers and challenges in the path of students who experience basic needs insecurity. This is an equity issue in our state. Our charge for this action network is to develop an agenda and plan to increase access to basic needs supports for students and increase access to post-secondary education for individuals receiving state supports. So I hope that that is a very clear charge for our group and what we are embarking upon together. And I think we have 5 meetings set for this spring, and it's going to be a whirlwind, and we're going to accomplish an incredible amount. But this is what we are shooting toward. I'm happy to open it up. If there's any thoughts, questions, just response that anybody would like to share as we move into the next portion of our agenda, which is breakouts. Anybody have anything? Did anybody want to share kind of a high-level takeaway from their breakout group?
Well, I'll jump in. We had a great discussion. We spent about half of our time sort of getting to know one another and kind of what is drawing us to this issue and topic, and had a good diversity of perspectives around the table. I guess we sort of raised 2 issues when we got to sort of the more in-depth discussion. Shauna King Sims from KCTCS was part of our group and has been working on these issues for years. And I think one of the things that's front and center for her is sort of how do we capitalize on our SNAP resources in a more organized way as a state. You know, we sort of talked about what we could do at the state level to bring together resources and think strategically. And so that's one thing that came up. And we spent most of the time really talking about sort of accessibility issues that, you know, for the populations that folks are seeing, really, you know, it's certainly issues around financial aid and financial access, but even more than that, perhaps, is communications. Sort of understanding what's available, having resources easy to access and simple to understand for folks who aren't familiar with an educational environment or a post-secondary environment. Family Scholar House has kiosks that they've launched in a couple areas in the state to try to attempt to really sort of make information accessible. So we talked a bit about that. So that's kind of the highlights. I don't know if anybody else from our group wants to jump in.
Thank you, Lee. Any other groups?
I just will really quickly share that I really enjoyed the breakout group. It was a great opportunity to get to know each other a little bit better in a smaller setting. And the thing that I really took away from that conversation was just like the deep commitment to helping ensure student success. It was very inspiring for me, and I appreciate everyone in the group for sharing their perspectives and their connection to the work.
Thanks, Carrie.
Lily. In group number 3, we had a great time talking about several things. There were 5 cool points that came up, and I'll just mention a couple, but we need to continue thinking about how to help students feel included, not in just part of these systems, but in the entirety of the system. So in inclusion overload, if you will. Another thing was honoring all of the demographics and thinking more about those that are typically not even thought about until, you know, afterward, like our veterans, and maybe even the adult population. And then finally, I'll just mention that communication is going to always be key. And I was sharing how, if we started to think about education in these terms, as big brands do, there's no more touching a person 7 times for them to just even pay attention. It's more like 30 or 37 is what some of the latest business research, I don't know, I saw that randomly on something. But now we have to get even more innovative and creative with how we communicate with them around the academic clock. And so anybody else want to point out anything? Kim, from Goodwill, I think you talked about just shifting the narrative, Christy, reshaping the narrative so that even trauma, those who experience trauma in some of these systems cannot, go through that as much. But did you all want to contribute?
First, I think you did our group justice, Phyllis, but I think we did talk about that shifting of the narrative of how people see accessing benefits, which are government provided, and accessing Pell Grants, when helping the individuals understand they both come from the government and they're both there to assist during this time. The other thing we talked about was working with a generation who responds immediately and needs feedback immediately. So lack of follow-up or systems that take longer time is where we tend to lose people.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Well, this is just the beginning of, these kind of deeper conversations that we'll get to have with one another. I'm very excited to now pass the microphone to my friend and colleague, Matt Berry, who is the interim executive director of the Kentucky Center for Statistics. So Jessica Cunningham is, taking a new role, and Matt is going to be in the interim leading the ship, so to say. All right, Matt, thank you so much for the 60-slide presentation. You tell me that we are looking forward to.
Well, I had to get a little, I've been texting Lily, I have 60 slides just so everyone knows, but that's a little revenge for her overselling. I think the word you used was exhilarating, so I don't want people to get the wrong impression. I don't have 60 slides, so we can all breathe easy. But good morning, everybody. For people I don't know, as Lily said, I'm Matt Berry. I am the interim executive director of KY Stats at Kentucky Center for Statistics. It's really exciting to be here. I shared with my group that I'm excited for KY Stats participation. I'm going to show you just a little bit about why I think this work in particular fits really, really well with our sort of renewed focus on equity and our new research agenda. Personally, I'm very excited. This has been, post-secondary access and student success has been sort of my focus of my career for however many years I've been at it. Doesn't matter how many, but so this is really, really super important to me. And I think a great opportunity for the state and for KY Stats. So thanks everyone for having us. I'm just going to give a very quick background for you all who may not work with us a lot about KY Stats. I promise that part will be relatively quick. I just want to sort of ground you all in who we are, because what I'd like to do at the end of the presentation is shift towards a discussion about questions that you all have beyond the data that I share today, because I think there's lots and lots of opportunities for KY Stats to provide more information, deeper and richer analysis. So I think that if you understand kind of who we are as an organization, it'll help that conversation. Excuse me. So a little bit of background. KY Stats is the state longitudinal data system, or the SLDS. So again, for those not initiated to our world, really all that means in the simplest form is we take data from across the state, and I'll show you many of our sources here in a second. We connect them at the individual level, of course, in a safe and anonymous way, and we connect them over time so that we can provide information and analysis to the public. This is the way in which we are governed, and I think it's, this isn't an organizational development presentation, I promise, but I think this is really cool and important because Kentucky is fortunate to have one of the best and most robust longitudinal data systems in the country. And one of the reasons why is because of our governance structure. So you can see that we have the real key players that would help for an education workforce focused data system at the table. So KDE, CPE, KIA, and CHFS are sort of our key governing board. And we have a very active and engaged group of partners and governing boards. So that's the way that we are structured. We kind of have two major parts: the Kentucky Longitudinal Data System, which is what I was describing, and then the Labor Market Information Office, which is really how we are able to connect from education to workforce, which is something that we'll talk about a little bit during the presentation and probably in the Q&A. This is, don't worry about reading this. This is like a little bit of a show off slide. This is just an example, or sort of like a foray into the type of data sources that we have, excuse me. Believe it or not, this isn't everything. And under each of those bullets, you could put like dozens or hundreds of bullets, depending on what it is. So we have, the point of this is really to show that we have an incredibly robust system, and that because of the way it's structured, we can ask all kinds of questions. So I'm really hitting that home, because what I'm going to show you today is like scratching the surface of what we can do. Now, we can't do everything. Sometimes conversations result in the fact that we can't do something yet, but we're in a continuous building mode. So because we have so many great partnerships, and because of the way we're structured and the way we're situated in the state, we always have opportunities to go out and get more if it's informative to the kind of work that we are engaged in. So this is an example of the kind of things we can do, and I think shows you why we're able to present or provide the information we are today. A couple more slides about where we're headed. These are the big categories of our focus areas of our new research agenda. We just had this was just passed, excuse me, in our December board meeting. So this is brand new, and you can see that this will take us through 2025. We have four big areas here. I'm not going to go into each of them, but I do think that I want to highlight two. First is applying an equity lens, and I'm going to show you a little bit more about what we mean by that. On the next slide, we actually convened an equity-focused group or committee of partners from across the state to develop an equity plan, which has then been embedded in our research agenda. So that's where that came from. The last one down at the bottom, expanding modeling and prediction, is just something I want you all to have kind of in the back of your heads. This is the nerdy research piece, and Dr. Gross is an old friend of mine from U of L, and I was texting him, where are you? Because I wanted him to speak up at this point about some of the opportunities he had, but he's teaching a class or whatever he's supposed to be doing right now. So anyway, he can't speak to this, but really what we want to do is, you'll see a lot of descriptive statistics today, which is sort of how many and what percentage and over time and that kind of thing. We think we have a lot of opportunity, given the data and resources we have, to ask deeper questions. Not to say that that's not really important work that we will continue to do, what you'll see today, but we think we can take steps beyond that. So that's one of the things that we're interested in. And then in terms of the equity lens, I think that the work of this action network is really well situated within what we're thinking about here. So you can see, really, when we talk about applying an equity lens, we think about it in these broad buckets here in the yellow. So we want to think about, and I have a presentation where we could go really super deep into this. So if anyone wants to talk more about it, we can. That's not the purpose of today necessarily, but we really want to think about individuals' backgrounds, experiences, opportunity, and access. And then the blue hexagons here are some of the ways in which we think we can measure those things. So we want to look at constantly everything that we're doing. We want to look at race and ethnicity, socioeconomic status, gender, and geography, and a lot more, but this is just an example of the way that we're going to apply an equity lens throughout our work at KY Stats. And then the last piece here in terms of background is just an example of a couple of reports. So if you all aren't familiar with these reports, I think they're good. And I can put them in the link as well if it's helpful or necessary. We have a lot of reports which are focused on post-secondary education and K-12 education as well. We just released our high school feedback report a couple of weeks ago, so that's fresh on our website. But we have the Kentucky Students' Right to Know and the Multi-State Post-Secondary Report. We're working on an update to the post-secondary feedback report. So we have lots of kind of standardized, or I should say routine reports that we release on an annual basis, which do dig into different aspects of the post-secondary student experience. Again, we're always looking for new ways to sort of examine these issues and talk about them and think about them. But these are a couple of examples, and I should have thought about this, but I'll put links to these in the chat when I'm done. So that's a little bit of background about KY Stats. In terms of the data for today, I wanted to give some background and take a look at some of the key populations I'm sorry, I keep doing that. Some of the key populations that we're discussing with the Student Basic Need Action Network, right? And so I think a lot of this was included in the background in some of the things that Lily sent out for us. But I did want to kind of take an opportunity to dig in and take a look at some of these. Excuse me, sorry, I can't see everything here on my on my screen, so just give me 1 second. Excuse me, everyone. All right, there we go. Okay, we'll get better from here, I promise. So this is the percentage of students enrolled. So really what I want to do is kind of go through, we're going to take a look at an example of the kind of data that we can pull, sort of some background and some grounding, I hope. What we've done is we've looked at enrolled post-secondary students by sector, so four-year public and KCTCS, percentage of students in each of those sectors who are enrolled in SNAP and KTAP. And we've tried to disaggregate those data both at the enrollment level. We've looked at retention, we've looked at completion, sort of as the big post-secondary outcome buckets. We've disaggregated in several ways, which I'll show you here in a little bit, but this is kind of the first step in terms of an understanding. So again, I just want to back up and say that there is a lot more we can do here, but I think this is a good first step. So I'm going to kind of go through these slides in some detail, but relatively quickly, leaving a little bit of room at the end for questions and then for kind of what else are you all interested in. So you can see here the percentage of students enrolled in post-secondary that are also enrolled in SNAP or KTAP is pretty consistent in terms of the percentage within each sector. And you can also see that there's a pretty significant gap in terms of the percentage between KCTCS and four-year public. So around 14% at KCTCS and between 2 and 3% in our four-year public. So we also, as I was saying, wanted to look at the percentage enrolled by different populations. And so this is in the 2021 academic year, which is the most recently available for at the time that we pulled these data. So going across the bottom here, you can see the total by sector again, which is kind of what we were looking at in the last slide. We've also looked at the 25 and older population, those under 25, which I know we used to say were traditional and non-traditional, but I don't think we say that anymore, which I'm sort of glad we're discarding of that terminology. But we've looked at age groups. Then we looked at Pell Grant receipt status, and then underrepresented minority classification. And so you can see there, the one that jumps out to me, at least when I'm looking at these, is the Pell Grant recipients, the percentage of those. And this, I know this makes probably conceptual sense for all of us, and this is one of those slides and pieces of data that we probably all know and walk around thinking that it is true, but it's good. I think it's good and helpful to see that it is in fact what you would expect. And so there's some overlap between Pell Grant recipients and SNAP and KTAP recipients.
Hey, Matt, actually, I was thinking about how low that percentage looks to me.
Well, I'm sorry, Lee, yeah, go ahead.
I would just imagine that if you're receiving public benefits, that 100% of those students would receive Pell. What's the disconnect there? So
I'm glad you brought that up, Lee. We're actually, I'm going to give a little bit of a preview to work we're doing with our colleagues from Cabinet for Health and Family Services. We have a grant which is in part intended to look at SNAP E&T recipients and to try to understand what barriers might exist to participation and engagement amongst that population. So that's not a cop-out answer, but we think that there's a lot of work to be done to understand that too, Lee. So I agree with you. I think there's one way to look at it, which is that's the highest percentage, so that makes sense. And then probably the more pertinent way for this group in particular is what you said, which is like, why isn't that closer to 100%? Because you would hope that it was.
Can I just add a little bit of context there that sort of is the disconnect between, I think, higher ed and SNAP eligibility?
Yes, please.
When you think about receipt of Pell Grant, it's based on FAFSA data that's from prior income year. And when we look at SNAP eligibility, that's income eligibility at the time of application. So not only do I think there's a disconnect between students who receive Pell Grants and their actual knowledge and ability to apply for SNAP, but there's also a disconnect in the way that higher education thinks about need and the way that SNAP thinks about need and the relative timing of those things.
Yeah, that's a great point, Carrie. Thank you. And by the way, those are the exact kind of sort of next level observations and questions that I think we're interested in hearing. So I think this is the final slide in terms of enrollment. You can see the percentage breakdown there between female and male enrollees at KCTCS and at four-year publics. I think to me, this is another interesting slide because you can see a pretty significant gap, particularly at the KCTCS level, close to 20% of female enrollees as opposed to 7% of male. So that's another area that, as we were pulling these data kind of jumped out to me at least. And that I think y'all might want to engage in conversation around. And then this is actually the last slide for enrollment, excuse me. So we've tried to disaggregate by race and again by race and ethnicity, excuse me, and again by sector of enrollment. And you can see that at the bar graph that jumps out again is the KCTCS Black enrollees about 23%, also enrolled in SNAP and KTAP. And then, you can see how it sort of disperses across racial and ethnic groups, excuse me. And some of these, by the way, are not reported because they're small numbers. And so we have to suppress the data just so everyone's clear about why some they may say 0. Okay, so this is a lot here on this chart. So I'll just give a very, very quick overview. This is a retention between fall and spring. And the next slide will show the next step of that, which we all know is first to second year retention. And the story here to me is, I think, twofold. One, you can see that there is a difference between those who did not receive SNAP or KTAP and those who did in terms of retention from fall to spring. And then two, if you go to the next slide, you can see that that gap exacerbates in the first to second year. And so again, this is probably not one of those, I don't think this is a revelation for anyone on this call, but I do think that that's, I think, an important thing to look at. And it's relatively consistent across years that we're reporting here as well. And then finally, as I said, the big kind of the third bucket of outcomes that we looked at was completion. And obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously. The first part of my career was around student retention, particularly first year student retention. And so when I was personally working on it, the thing that I used to always say that I probably am not allowed to say anymore is we care about retention because eventually we care about completion, right? And so really what it does is it makes a lot of sense that you see these gaps in the first to second semester and then first to second year retention, and that they exist also in the completion percentages as well. And so again, we disaggregated these by some of these key student groups, 25 and older, under 25, Pell Receipt or not, and then underrepresented minority status or not. And then, of course, the totals here. And so if you start just at the totals, you can see that, again, there's a big gap in completion, 45% completion rate versus 25% completion rate for the four-year publics. And then 46 and 33, and those stay. I think there are gaps persistent across the board here, and we can see that some are larger than others. And then, yes.
So that was just interesting because you could go back a sec.
Yeah, sure.
It looks like KCTCS total has a higher completion rate than our four-year publics, but that's probably because students are still enrolled. Did you remove if they were still enrolled from the completion expectation?
So no, yeah. Thanks for saying that, Lily. So yeah, some of this is a time component in this. We didn't remove that in this overview, but that's something we can do in the future. Yeah, so you're right. There would probably be a pretty significant. Well, I shouldn't say significant, but there would certainly be a number of individuals who are still enrolled and not yet and would eventually complete.
I mean, there's 12 and 13 percentage point gaps from receiving SNAP and not receiving SNAP. It's a little counterintuitive because we want to make the case that adding SNAP benefits increases a student's retention and completion. But I think that what we're kind of showing is that they have even more need if they are eligible for public benefits. And so there are even more barriers that may be in front of a student to achieving those goals. So it's just a different way to figure out how to make that case.
Yeah, I think so. From my perspective, Lily, you know, my intuition is similar to yours. I think, which is why I was happy to hear some of the discussion early on about basic needs being a broad term that encompasses more than, you know, any one sort of public benefits program. I think one of the things that you could ask is whether or not this is an indication of that, of how significant the needs are, and then ask whether or not those needs are being fully met and in what ways. I think those are the kind of questions that a slide like this lends itself to. And then, so again, I think you're seeing a similar story here in terms of breakdowns between female, and male completion rates, and then SNAP or KTAP. So again, those who did not receive SNAP or KTAP completed at a higher percentage during this time. And female completion rates in terms of those that did not receive are higher, although that kind of flips for those who did receive SNAP. So this is, again, to me, this is another, I think, area of opportunity for further exploration. And then I believe this is the slide, the last slide, but this is completion rates. So again, we've had to suppress some data here because of small numbers. But a similar story here in terms of differences between racial and ethnic groups, and then also differences between those who received or did not receive SNAP or KTAP. And then finally, I think we've kind of talked about most of these, but these are some highlights and some takeaways from the data themselves. And I think that what I'd like to do, since we're, you know, kind of coming towards the end of our time here, instead of going through these, I'm going to show all of these slides can be shared and will be shared. And we've discussed most of these points, I think. So what I wanted to do is just sort of open it up for you all to either ask questions of related to the data that I just shared, or, you know, I would love to hear some questions that you all have that are kind of the next step. What else do you want to know? What else could we provide that would be helpful? Are there different ways that we could look at these data that would be helpful to you all? Again, this is really, really important for us, and I think a great opportunity for KY Stats to be involved in this conversation. So I'm going to stop sharing. If anyone wants to look at a particular slide, I can pull it back up and go back, but I just wanted to open it up to you all, and I'll stop talking and hear what questions you all might have.
I have a question. This is Stephanie Solonier. So KTAP is only available or predominantly available to custodial parents. And we know that it is largely used by females. Have you looked at anything like subsidized housing? Again, also largely families, but SSI, just to get something that is broader, like SNAP covers everybody. You don't have to have children or be custodial. Is there another way to look at that isn't so squarely focused on you know, single parents and particularly females?
We have not. Subsidized housing would be, I don't think we would probably be able to do that analysis with what's in our system today, but again, that's probably an opportunity for us. I think the point is a strong point though, and I think we need to think about other ways that we can add ways of understanding students who probably have need. So we have not done that. This is sort of a first step at that. But I take your point, and I think we need to figure out how else we might be able to measure that.
Matt, I just want to say thank you for that presentation. It was incredibly helpful, and I look forward to digging into more of your Kentucky data and, you know, using it particularly to talk about changing some of the policies that we know need to be changed at the federal level. It's such a great data set that's, you know, really good to be able to draw from to make those points. I actually think the comparison of, if I'm understanding this correctly, it was all students in their completion versus students on public benefits in their completion rates. Is that correct? I actually think that's not a helpful analysis, because that's comparing students of all income ranges of students with very low income ranges. And I think without the proper context, it can look like there's a causal relationship between receipt of public benefits and completion, when we actually know it is the lack of resources that is directly contributing to completion and systemic racism and those barriers. So I think that, you know, it's helpful to have those conversations, but I think pulling it out and making sure that we're comparing more similar groups gives us a better indication of what completion looks like across those groups.
Great point. Thanks for that, Carrie.
Thanks. That kind of leads into my question that I had. So looking at the need, and when we look at like financial aid and the need for students who've already had to receive assistance, one of the barriers that I run into all the time is that we have an emergency fund that is available. I've consulted and spoken with folks at many institutions, and a lot of them struggle with trying to figure out how to do that. So if we use the unmet need as our guide with federal financial aid, which all of y'all know it's not reflective of what students need. And so if you have a student who comes in who has received all the services that we just spoke about, and then their unmet need is compared to the same as another person who doesn't need as many resources, then what I run into is I'm not able to give a student an emergency grant that may be $400 or $500 that can keep them from getting evicted, all based on some numbers that the federal government has said that student has met their need or they're beyond the need. And it's just a great disconnect. It's really frustrating for me on a regular. And I just want to know like how we can look at that, how we can look at the statistics to prove how wrong that process is.
I mean, I will just add a little bit of context to that, and you know, my colleagues that are at EdTrust can add to that if they would like, but there's been a significant critique of the FAFSA calculations and how unmet need is calculated. That's a bigger, you know, I think that's politics, not policy, and something that unfortunately we can look at what the role of Kentucky Aid plays in that conversation as a potential action item or a policy lever. I think the bigger challenges with the federal calculation are going to continue to be an ongoing battle. And it's actually really beneficial for people who are federal advocates to be in this conversation about how that impacts you at the state level, because then we're able to take that and advocate for those policies with some real evidence about why they're harmful.
I had a question around data and waivers, tuition waivers. So of course, the waiver that I deal with the most is tuition waiver for foster and adopted children, but also I know that there are waivers for veterans and educators and a variety of waivers across the state. And I was wondering if there was any interest or an idea about looking at the numbers for, you know, graduation retention rate for those who are using waivers. I know that LRC already does a report around use of the tuition waiver for foster and adopted children. I just didn't know if there was any data on the other waivers as well.
So Lorraine, I'll just jump in and say that I would have to dig in on our end to see if we have that in our system, the tuition waiver flag. Off the top of my head, I really don't know, but I'm not quite sure that we have it. So I would have to, I'd have to go back and ask, but I think that's again, a really important question that we would want to try to pursue if we can.
I know that we could literally talk about data for another hour. So thank you, Matt, so much for sharing that. And I know that those slides and also the Tableau is available to you to continue exploring the data. And please, if you don't mind, write down some of those questions and those thoughts that you have so that you could either email them in or bring them back to the next meeting and conversation as we continue this work. So just to wrap us up here super quickly, our next meeting is February 15th from 9 to 10:30. It will be virtual again. And I'll kind of give you an email about a week in advance that tells a little bit more about the focus of that agenda. And we definitely are excited to see all of you. Again, I will follow up this meeting with the agenda again, a link to the Tableau, the meeting recording, both of the PowerPoints that were shared, as well as those infographic assets. And would greatly appreciate you helping kind of spread that word around the basic needs infographic that we're putting out there. And also keep an eye out for the press release that CPE will be sharing out today, just regarding the important work of this group. The last thing that I did want to share, just as a note, in case you're interested, if you haven't already registered, the 2023 Student Success Summit is coming up February 27th and 28th. It will be in Lexington this year. And we have an entire pathway focused on student basic needs that is being led by Carrie Welton. It's a 2-day workshop that will allow campuses, campus teams, and community partners to really identify and help create kind of an action plan for yourselves around improving the ecosystem of support for students. So registration does close February 15th, so our next meeting. All right, well, that's all that I have. Thank you all so much for an amazing meeting and conversation today, and I look forward to seeing you in about a month. Bye, everyone.